Trinity goes, basically what we're talking about is, or what I consider, we could do, there's lots of Holy Trinities, that's why it's like, the Holy Trinity. But yeah, so in lighting there's key, fill, edge, that's a Holy Trinity, and then when it comes to camera there's aperture, ISO, and basically shutter speed or shutter angle. If you have DSLR, most of the times you're going to be into that shutter speed world. And so basically what happens is we'll start off with aperture. So aperture is basically how big or wide your lens is opened up, the iris basically, and that's what that does is it allows light into the sensor. So if you shoot, you have a lens that goes to like a 2.8, and that's like the smallest that'll go, or a 1.8. A lot of people have prime DSLRs, so you can get them for like $100. But so 1.8 basically means like wide open. You're allowing the most light possible into that sensor. And then, so what are some of the benefits of that is it's going to get an incredibly shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field basically is like, if I were to go here, you see that this is out of focus basically. And you come in here and it gets a little bit more in focus, and then you see me, I'm in focus. If you were to open it up and maybe you would go a 5, you're letting less light expose the sensor, which creates a darker image, but you're getting way more depth of field. So if I were to put my hand back here, basically this would be in focus. I'd put my hand here, this would be in focus. And that's something you want to use for when you're doing like, big grand wides, just don't always shoot the camera wide open. Then we go into your shutter speed. So I've gotten out of shutter speed, I still have to use it every now and again, but I usually do shutter angle. It's kind of the same thing. So most film basically is you use like a 1/80th shutter angle, but for this purposes you would double your shutter speed to the frame rate. So say you're shooting in a 23.98 or a 24 frames per second, you want to go double the shutter speed. So that's going to be something in, like 1/48th, 1/50th. And what that does is, if you see here, there's a little bit of motion blur. You're basically opening up your shutter, which is allowing light, how fast, the shutter, because this is what your camera's doing basically. That's why some people call it a blink box, because it's basically blinking. It's blinking right now, it's blinking 48 times per every second, just and so the general rule of double your frame rate is 180 degree angle, and that just gives it like a nice kind of cushion feel. Sometimes like for sports you'll see they have these really high shutter frames, but they're really moving fast here, you know what I mean? So, and you want to be able to catch most of that, especially when you're like following a ball, like you have to be able to see that more. But sometimes in documentaries just looks really choppy. Because if you're just walking around, you don't need to see every single like millisecond of a movement. Cinematic image, is smooth. There's a cushion behind it. That's why we shoot 24 frames. There's a little bit more black in the frame. So you think you got 30 frames per second. Now you go down to 24. That's six less frames per second. Or it's just, it's black. Basically, you're just taking picture, and you're giving the illusion of a moving image. So that's just something to keep in mind. A lot of people use a higher shutter speed when they don't have an ND filter. So an ND filter is definitely something that you could, variable ND filter. I like Tiffin brands. There's tons of brands that, you can use. And basically what that does is it just blocks the amount of light in there. And then we'll talk about ISO.